Hello, good morning or good afternoon. We are going to continue learning the Cold War today. Here we are. We're starting with slide 135, domestic developments during the 1950s. This is a pretty easy topic. We're going to talk about family life and culture of the 1950s, post-World War II stuff. Okay, so the GI Bill of Rights. Some of you guys may have heard of the GI Bill. Maybe your parents are veterans or they're in the military, so you've probably heard the GI Bill. So that started in 1944, which is towards the end of World War II. We had millions of soldiers serving in World War II. And by this time we knew the war was coming to an end, and we just wanted to have a plan in place for soldiers when they returned from the war. So, to kind of ease them back into civilian life, because after being at war for years, everything kind of changes, and then to come back from a crazy setting like that, you kind of don't know where to start, what to do. That's been your life war, and it's time to kind of come back into like the American culture of things. So the GI Bill serves two purposes, and it's still around today. One, it will pay for college tuition for any soldiers, veterans, wanting to return to school, wanting to return to college. So if soldiers were drafted for World War II and they didn't get to go to college, well, when they return from the war, they can go to college and the government will pay for their college tuition. So it's a good thing. And if soldiers or veterans choose not to go to college, that opportunity can be passed down to their kids, and it could pay for their kids' college. Another thing that it does is that it provides a low interest home loan, meaning that they can purchase a home at a very affordable interest rate. It's going to be lower than most people. So their payments will be lower. There's just a lot of advantages to this. So it just makes things a lot easier for veterans. So those are the two purposes of the GI Bill. All right, so you have a veteran right here trying to decide, should I use my GI Bill to go to school, to maybe start a business, because that money can also go to a business, or maybe go to regular work, or maybe buy a home. There's tons of opportunities for veterans. All right, so the baby boom, this stands for the largest generation in American history. So the largest group of people, they fall from the ages, not the age, but that means they were born between 1946 and 1964. So for many of you guys, it might be a great-grandparent, great-great-grandparent, just depending if they're still alive. They may be probably as young as in their 70s, if they fall in the baby boom generation. So what happened was, it's kind of funny, after World War II, when veterans came back from the war, they, of course, celebrated that they were alive, that they survived the war. They were super excited, and they celebrated with their girlfriends. They got married to them, and they basically had tons of babies. There were tons of babies born right after World War II. And World War II ended in 1945, and the very first boom of babies being born was the following year, 1946. But then after that, so many babies were being born and people were starting families, that it basically became a trend to get married young and start a family at a young age. So that's the 1950s. You may have seen like older TV shows on the 1950s. That's what I'm talking about. So it's pretty neat. There was one baby born every 7 seconds, which is pretty cool, right? Like, I mean, that's a lot of babies born. They were like literally giving birth like right next to each other. It's kind of crazy. Babies were just all, just kind of scooting along. Hospitals were overfilled. They had to open up more hospitals because of just all the babies that were being born. So let's look at a chart right here. My computer is a little slow. So look at this, 1945, that is the end of World War II. There's not a lot of babies born because, well, the men are all at war, right? But when they get back, boom, tons of babies born and more and more. And it becomes a trend to start a family young. If you weren't married and having your first child by like 20 years old, people were looking at you kind of weird, like, why aren't you married? Like, what are you doing with your life? It just wasn't socially acceptable by women, especially like if other women just waited on having kids and starting a family, getting married and stuff. So yeah, 1946 to 1964, that group of people that were born between those years or during those years is considered the baby boom generation. All right, so what are two things that the GI Bill offers veterans? They offer one, paid college tuition, right? The government pays for their college tuition. And two, a low interest home loan. So a loan for a home that has low interest rates. I mean, there's more opportunities for veterans, right, than anyone else. Question 34, what does the baby boom generation stand for? Stands for the largest generation in American history of people born. What years fall under the baby boom generation? 1946 to 1964, right after World War II. All right, new topic, the Interstate Highway Act of 1956. So at this time, our president was Eisenhower. Eisenhower, remember, he was the commander of the Allied forces all throughout World War II. He was like the main one. So he became president, right? And then he wanted an official highway system in the United States, because at this time in the 1950s, we didn't have good roads. We had some roads that were paved, some that were still dirt roads. We had a lot of roads that didn't connect. We didn't have roads that could directly take you out of the state into a different state. If you just followed one road, you would have to go through many different roads just to get out of the state. And it was very complicated. And when Eisenhower was fighting the Germans in Germany, he was very inspired by Germany's road system. They had an official interstate highway system. Everything was paved. You can travel high speeds on these roads. You would not get a flat tire. There weren't many potholes. It was, and that's what, Germany is known for, the Autobahn. They have really good cars that go with their efficient road system, right? So he was inspired by that, and he wanted the same thing for the US, just a really good highway system where everything kind of connects. You can get on one road and you can keep traveling that road, and it will take you out of the state to a different state and so forth. So that's what he required, and that's what we got. So it was a law. It was a interstate highway law. Okay, and here you go. Think of like I-10, that's Interstate 10. If you take that road and keep going on it, eventually you will end up in a different state. That was the whole point. Okay, so the growth of suburbs and economic prosperity. So in the 1950s, after World War II, like I said, you have veterans that are using their GI Bill to, they're having babies, right? And now that they're having babies, they're getting married, having babies, starting a family. Now they need a new home. They're using their GI Bill to buy a new home. And then they are the city was just getting very, very overcrowded, and there just wasn't a lot of space for all the homes, for the demand of all the homes. So homes started to kind of spread out of the city into the suburbs. Think of like 1604, outside 1604, that's considered the suburbs, where people are moving a little outside the city, but they're not moving to the country, to the rural areas, right? It's still considered the city. And, you have that, but, now we need a better road system, right? So that is kind of why the Interstate Highway Act was also created, because you have people moving outside, and now we need outside the city, now we need a better road system, because people are going to be commuting from their home long distances to work in the city. And then we created the highway system, and that allowed for more people to want to move, out into the suburbs, because there is a better road system. For an example, you guys are familiar with North 281, outside of 1604. You should be familiar. Like, the traffic is horrible. The construction is so bad. Well, it used to be 2 lanes for a very long time. And a lot of people did not want to live out there. For me, for an example, my husband and I, we did not want to live on that side of town, even though all of our friends have families and live on that side of town in the suburbs. But, one thing that we've always dreaded is the traffic. Like, there's so much traffic to get home. There's so much traffic to get out of there and go all the way to Lee High School, that just kind of discouraged us from wanting to live over there. But now they're making a better road system for that area, that we're like, you know what, maybe after they complete the roads, we'll go move out there. So that is what I'm kind of talking about. But back in the 1950s, 410 was the suburbs. So that's kind of funny, right? But now the suburbs today is 1604 and outside of that. All right. And there were just so many houses that had to be built so quickly, that they were all like just basically the same houses that were built. They were all constructed the same way, same style, maybe different colors, but you had a 2-bedroom option or a 3-bedroom option, but the houses would look exactly alike. So some of you guys may have, if you kind of travel around the city, I'm sure you've seen neighborhoods where the houses all look alike, especially the flat top roofs, right? Those are all like during kind of this time period and a little after, but they were inspired by this time period. And it's just kind of funny, but they had to quickly build houses, and they didn't have time to make each house different, unique. They just had to build them quickly because there were families, starting quickly, and the demand was just really, really high. So that is that. All right, what were the effects of the Interstate Highway Act? More people moved to the city, or more people moved out of the city and to the suburbs? This is your answer. Military science and technology. All right, so President Truman, remember President Truman, he's the one that dropped the atomic bombs, ending World War II against the Japanese. He was president for a while, and one of the first things he did right after World War II, 2 years later in 1947, he ended segregation in the military. Segregation is the separation of races, all Black only, all white. That's kind of how it was in the military, right? Black, regiments, white regiments or units. They didn't have them mixed together, integrated. So he ends segregation and he integrates the military. And that's huge. That's a really big step towards civil rights, because this kind of sparks the civil rights movement. From that point on, there's just other things that kind of start to, trickle, encouraging the civil rights movement. But it kind of started right here with Executive Order 9981. So it ends segregation in the military, integrates whites and Blacks. All right, it was a big deal, so it was all over headlines. What did Executive Order 9981 do to the military/armed forces? Did it allow women to join? It ended segregation. It changed the minimum age limit to 18. It's the second one. It ended segregation. All right, entertainment and culture. All right, so now we have televisions. Now, we had televisions actually before the 1950s, but only the wealthy could afford them. And there were only like 2 or 3 channels, which is kind of boring, right? And all black and white. You know, most people still prefer the radio as their form of entertainment. But in the 1950s, now we have a television network where you have like ABC, NBC, and you have TV shows and, like I Love Lucy and other types of TV shows. So this kind of encourages people to start buying televisions. And now that they have families at home, it's a good way to bring families together, entertain kids. There's cartoons now and things like that. So it replaces the radio. And I mean, the radio is just going to be used mainly for music, but this does bring families even closer together. Okay, the beat movement. Beats or beatniks, that's what you call these people right here, they were just not very traditional people. So in the 1950s, and then it trickles on into the 60s and 70s, we had people who just, wanted to live a very, very simple life. Wanted very little structure as possible. They weren't traditional people. They did not care about starting families, getting married, going to college, having a job. They kind of just lived very simple. They hung out in coffee houses or outside of places and kind of like, played the banjo and all those other types of, music instruments that are very like, simple and traditional. And they were kind of considered like rebels because they were not traditional. And this is kind of like your first form of hippies. Like hippies of the 70s kind of started with this group right here, with this movement. All right, so that's the beatniks. And then we have rock and roll. So some of you guys are familiar with Elvis Presley, right? Elvis Presley, his time period is the 1950s. And so rock and roll is a new form of music, which is a mixture of blues and jazz that started in the 50s. And, there were other types of course, musicians, not just Elvis Presley, but he becomes the king of rock and roll, the face of rock and roll. Rock and roll was so extreme and so different from what people were used to. Think of like jazz music, right? That was like the most common form of music of like the 20s, 30s, and 40s, but now we have rock and roll. And, our idea of rock and roll is like, I don't know, Metallica or something like that. But this is this is the original rock and roll. And what's interesting about this is that this type of music just had girls, young teenage girls, going nuts. They loved going to concerts, by Elvis Presley, and they would get so wild and crazy, and they became like groupies, following these musicians, and parents despise their kids for having an interest in this type of music. So it broke traditions and just caused a cultural divide between generations, between families. Like their parents were one way, and then you have, their kids that are developing and growing and taking interest in a completely different way. And, it was just, that's just how it was. We're seeing that today. And, we saw that back in like the 1920s, the roaring 20s, right? With the flappers, the women who were breaking traditions. Well, this is another wave of traditions being broken with, kids and their parents, right? So loved by teenagers, hated by parents. Okay, question 38. What new form of home entertainment replaced the radio and brought families closer together? The television. 39, which of the following best describes beatniks and the beat movement? All right, so they supported war and the military? No, not at all. they were traditional people that encouraged family life at a young age. Not at all either. Or they believed in living a very simple life, no work, no family, etc. This is them, right? Question 40, what new type of music of the 1950s caused a cultural divide amongst generations? That's rock and roll. All right, and that is it for today. Thank you for watching this video. I'll see you guys later. Bye-bye.